Soweto Uprising, student-led protest that began on June 16, 1976, in Soweto, South Africa, against the government's plans to impose the Afrikaans language as a medium of instruction in schools for black students. After a deadly interaction with the police that day, the initial protest escalated into a much larger and often violent challenge to the authority of the South African government, a challenge that was marked over the next days and weeks by protests and rioting in Soweto and other areas of South Africa. The uprising and the ensuing protests created a crisis of legitimacy for South Africa's apartheid government that contributed to its eventual downfall, in 1994. The uprising occurred against a backdrop of entrenched racial inequality, perpetuated by the South African government's apartheid policies, which had long sanctioned racial segregation and discrimination against non-whites in the country in all aspects of life. In education, specific schools were designated for black, classified by the government as Bantu, students and were subject to decisions made by the government's Department of Bantu Education. Some of those decisions concerned language. The Soweto Uprising, or Soweto riots, was a series of demonstrations and protests led by black school children in South Africa during apartheid that began on the morning of June 16, 1976. Students from various schools began to protest in the streets of the Soweto township in response to the introduction of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in black schools. It is estimated that 20,000 students took part in the protests. They were met with fierce police brutality, and many were shot and killed. The number of pupils killed in the uprising is usually estimated as 176, but some sources estimate as many as 700 fatalities. The riots were a key moment in the fight against apartheid as it sparked renewed opposition against apartheid in South Africa both domestically and internationally. In remembrance of these events, June 16 is a public holiday in South Africa since 1991, named Youth Day. Internationally, June 16 is known as the Day of the African Child, DAC. Black South African high school students in Soweto protested the Afrikaans Medium Decree of 1974, which forced all black schools to use Afrikaans and English in equal terms as languages of instruction. The association of Afrikaans with apartheid prompted black South Africans to prefer English. Even the Bantustan regimes chose English and an indigenous African language as official languages. In addition, English was gaining prominence as the language most often used in commerce and industry. The 1974 decree was intended to force the reverse of the decline of Afrikaans among black Africans. The Afrikaner-dominated government used the clause of the 1909 Union of South Africa Act that recognized only English and Dutch, the latter being replaced by Afrikaans in 1925, as official languages as its pretext. All schools had to provide instruction in both Afrikaans and English as languages, but white South African students learned other subjects in their home language. The regional director of Bantu Education, Northern Transvaal Region, J.G. Erasmus, told circuit inspectors and principals of schools that from January 1, 1975, Afrikaans had to be used for mathematics, arithmetic, and social studies from Standard 5, 7th grade, according to the Afrikaans Medium Decree. English would be the medium of instruction for general science and practical subjects, homecraft, needlework, woodwork, metalwork, art, agricultural science. Indigenous languages would be used only for religious instruction, music, and physical culture. The decree was resented deeply by the black population. Desmond Tutu, the Bishop of Lesotho, stated that Afrikaans was the language of the oppressor. Also, teacher organizations, such as the African Teachers Association of South Africa, objected to the decree. Punt Jansen, the Deputy Minister of Bantu Education, was quoted as saying, "A black man may be trained to work on a farm or in a factory. He may work for an employer who is either English-speaking or Afrikaans-speaking, and the man who has to give him instructions may be either English-speaking or Afrikaans-speaking. Why should we now start quarreling about the medium of instruction among the black people as well? No, I have not consulted them and I am not going to consult them. I have consulted the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. A change in language of instruction forced the students to focus on understanding the language, instead of the subject material. That made critical analysis of the content difficult and discouraged critical thinking. The resentment grew until April 30, 1976, when children at Orlando West Junior School in Soweto went on strike and refused to go to school. Their rebellion then spread to many other schools in Soweto. Black South African students protested because they believed that they deserved to be treated and taught like white South Africans. Also, very few people in Soweto spoke Afrikaans. A student from Morris Isaacson High School, June16 Mashinini, proposed a meeting on June 13, 1976 to discuss what should be done. Students formed an action committee, later known as the Soweto Students' Representative Council, which organized a mass rally for June 16 to make themselves heard. On the morning of June 16, 1976, between 10,000 and 20,000 black students walked from their schools to Orlando Stadium for a rally to protest having to learn in Afrikaans in school. Many students who later participated in the protest arrived at schools that morning without prior knowledge of the protest but agreed to become involved. The protest was planned by the Soweto Students' Representative Council's, SSRC, Action Committee, with support from the wider Black Consciousness movement. Teachers in Soweto also supported the march after the Action Committee emphasized good discipline and peaceful actions. June16 Mashinini led students from Morris Isaacson High School to join up with others who walked from Naledi High School. The students began the march, only to find out that police had barricaded the road along their intended route. The leader of the Action Committee asked the crowd not to provoke the police, and the march continued on another route and eventually ended up near Orlando High School. The crowd of between 3,000 and 10,000 students made its way towards the area of the school. Students sang and waved placards with slogans such as, "Down with Afrikaans," "Viva Azania," and "If we must do Afrikaans, Vorster must do Zulu." The police set their trained dog on the protesters, who responded by killing it. The police then began to shoot directly at the children. Among the first students to be shot dead were the 15-year-old Hastings Ndlovu and the 12-year-old Hector Pietersen, who were shot at Orlando West High School. The photographer Sam Enzima took a photograph of a dying Hector Pietersen as he was carried away by Mbuyisa Makubo and accompanied by his sister, Antoinette Peterson, which became the symbol of the Soweto Uprising. The police attacks on the demonstrators continued, and 23 people died on the first day in Soweto. Among them was Dr. Melville Edelstein. He was stoned to death by the mob and left with a sign around his neck proclaiming, "Beware, Afrikaans is the most dangerous drug for our future." The violence escalated, as bottle stores and beer halls, seen as outposts of the apartheid government, were targeted, as were the official outposts of the state. The violence had abated by nightfall. Police vans and armored vehicles patrolled the streets throughout the night. Emergency clinics were swamped with injured and bloody children. The police requested for the hospital to provide a list of all victims with bullet wounds to prosecute them for rioting. The hospital administrator passed the request to the doctors, but the doctors refused to create the list. The doctors recorded bullet wounds as abscesses. 1,500 armed police officers were deployed to Soweto on June 17 carrying weapons, including automatic rifles, stun guns, and carbines. They drove around in armored vehicles with helicopters monitoring the area from above. The South African Army was also ordered on standby as a tactical measure to show military force. Crowd control methods used by South African police at the time included mainly dispersement techniques. The number of people who died is usually given as 176, with estimates up to 700. The original government figure claimed only 23 students were killed, and the number of wounded was estimated to be over 1,000 people. Black students also killed 2 white people during the uprising, one of them Dr. Edelstein. The clashes occurred while the South African government was being forced to transform apartheid in internationalize towards a more benign form. In October 1976, Transkei, the first Bantustan, was proclaimed independent by the government. That attempt to showcase supposed South African commitment to self-determination backfired, however, since Transkei was internationally derided as a puppet state. For the government, the uprising marked the most fundamental challenge yet to apartheid. The economic and political instability that it caused was heightened by the strengthening international boycott. It would be 14 years before Nelson Mandela was released, but the state could never restore the relative peace and social stability of the early 1970s, as black resistance grew. The liberation movements that were either weakened or exiled gained new momentum as a surge of recruits joined. Many white South Africans were outraged at the government's actions in Soweto. The day after the massacre, about 400 white students from the University of the Witwatersrand marched through Johannesburg's city centre in protest of the killing of children. Black workers went on strike as well and joined them as the campaign progressed. Riots also broke out in the black townships of other cities in South Africa. Student organizations directed the energy and anger of the youth toward political resistance. Students in Tembisa organized a successful and nonviolent solidarity march, but a similar protest held in Kagiso led to police stopping a group of participants, forcing them to retreat, and killing at least 5 people while reinforcements were awaited. The violence died down only on June 18. The University of Zululand's records and administration buildings were set ablaze, and 33 people died in incidents in Port Elizabeth in August. In Cape Town, 92 people died between August and September. Most of the bloodshed had abated by the end of 1976, when the death toll had stood at more than 600. The continued clashes in Soweto caused economic instability. The South African rand devalued fast, and the government was plunged into a crisis. The African National Congress printed and distributed leaflets with the slogan "Free Mandela, Hang Vorster." It immediately linked the language issue to its revolutionary heritage and program and helped to establish its leading role. See Barack Herson's Year of Fire, Year of Ash, for a discussion of the ANC's ability to channel and direct the popular anger. The Hector Pieterson Memorial and Museum opened in Soweto in 2002, not far from the spot that the 12-year-old Hector was shot on the June 16, 1976. The UN Security Council passed Resolution 392, which strongly condemned the incident and the apartheid government. A week after the uprising began, U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger met South African State President Vorster in West Germany to discuss the situation in Rhodesia, but the Soweto uprising did not feature in the discussions. Kissinger and Vorster met again in Pretoria in September 1976, with students in Soweto and elsewhere protesting his visit and being fired on by police. On the night of August 26, 1986, the police opened fire on a demonstration in the White City locale. They killed between 20 and 25 people, possibly more, and wounded over 60. The South African government officially claimed that 11 people had died but later raised the figure to 12. The South African Information Bureau claimed that police opened fire on 2 occasions, one after a grenade had been tossed at police and wounded 4 policemen. Residents said that the fighting started when local officials sought to evict tenants who had been refusing to pay their rents for 2 months as part of a mass boycott. Security forces were said to have initially used tear gas to disperse crowds. Later, a resident telephoned a reporter to say, "The police are shooting left and right. They just shot an old man. They are shooting at everyone, everything." The UDF leader Frank Chikane described the police actions as if entering enemy territory, with guns blazing. Minister of Information Louis Nel later came under fire for stating at a press conference, "Let there be no misunderstanding regarding the real issue at stake. It is not the rental issue, it is not the presence of security forces in black residential areas, it is not certain remembrance days, it is not school programs. The violent overthrow of the South African state is the issue." As retaliation, a black town councillor was killed the following day, hacked to death by a mob. On September 4, police filled a stadium with tear gas to stop a mass funeral for a number of the victims, swept through Soweto and broke up other services being held, including one at Regina Mundi Roman Catholic, where tear gas canisters were thrown into a bus containing mourners. A service at Avalon Cemetery at which thousands were reported to have gathered was also dispersed with tear gas and armored vehicles. Tear gas was also reported to have been dropped from helicopters on processions and crowds. Images of the riots spread all over the world and shocked millions. The photograph of Hector Pieterson's dead body, as captured by the photojournalist Sam Enzima, caused outrage and brought down international condemnation on the apartheid government. The Soweto riots were depicted in the 1987 film by the director Richard Attenborough, Cry Freedom, and in the 1992 musical film Sarafina, and the musical production of the same name by Mbongini and Gemma. The riots also inspired the novel A Dry White Season by Andre Brink and a 1989 movie of the same title. The uprising also featured in the 2003 film Stander about the notorious bank robber and former police captain Andre Stander. The lyrics of the song Soweto Blues by Hugh Masekela and Miriam Makeba describe the Soweto Uprising and the children's part in it. In June 1996, the Ulwazi Educational Radio Project of Johannesburg compiled an hour-long radio documentary 20 years after the uprising portraying the events of June 16 entirely from the perspective of people living in Soweto at the time. Many of the students who planned or joined the uprising, as well as other witnesses, took part, including the photographer Peter Magubane, the reporter Sophie Tima and Tim Wilson, the white doctor who pronounced Pieterson dead in Baragwanath Hospital. The program was broadcast on SABC and on a number of local radio stations throughout South Africa. The following year, BBC Radio 4 and BBC World Service broadcast a revised version containing fresh interviews, The Day Apartheid Died. The program was runner-up at the 1998 European Community Humanitarian Office, ECHO, TV and Radio Awards and also at the 1998 Media Awards of the One World International Broadcasting Trust and was highly commended at the 1998 Prix Italia Radio Awards. In May 1999, it was rebroadcast by BBC Radio 4 as The Death of Apartheid with a fresh introduction that provided added historical context for a British audience by Anthony Sampson, a former editor of Drum magazine and the author of the authorized biography, 1999, of Nelson Mandela. Sampson linked extracts from the BBC Sound archive that charted the long struggle against apartheid from the Sharpeville massacre of 1960 to the riots of 1976 and the murder of Steve Biko until Mandela's release from prison in 1990 and the future president's speech in which he acknowledged the debt owed by all black South Africans to the students who had given their lives in Soweto on June 16, 1976. The Soweto Uprising did lasting damage to the apartheid government on multiple levels. It was seen by the black youth population as a direct attack on it. After the uprising, there was an exodus of young people from South Africa, and many joined the African National Congress, ANC, the chief organization resisting the apartheid government, in exile. Later the ANC even took credit for the uprising, as did some other anti-apartheid organizations, though such claims are generally considered to misrepresent the influence any organization might have had on the students. Thank you for watching this video.